The plastic pregnancy test with two bright red lines hit the kitchen table with a sharp clatter, almost knocking over the cup of cold coffee. Tara stood on the other side, leaning heavily on the countertop, staring at the test as if he were looking at a complete stranger. And at her child. His voice was low, but every word carried barely contained anger. Ina, what is this supposed to mean? She blinked in confusion, shifting her gaze from the white plastic strip to his tense face. What are you talking about, Tara's? This is ours. She began in a trembling voice, trying to stand. Sit down, he snapped and took a step back, as if afraid to get too close. You know exactly what the doctors told me 3 years ago. I can't have children. 0%. Do you understand me? Ina, a 33-year-old marketing specialist, suddenly felt as if the walls of their cozy rented apartment on the main street were pressing in from all sides. The air grew heavy. Breathing became difficult. This had to be a stupid joke. A mistake. Something that could be solved if they just talked calmly. Medicine isn't always exact, she said, desperately trying to find a logical explanation. Miracles happen. Doctors can be wrong. Miracles only happen in cheap novels, he answered coldly. In real life, there are lovers. Her heart dropped. Who are you sleeping with? He asked, turning toward the window. That new client from the agency? Or one of your exes? The words hurt more than a slap. Ina covered her face with her hands, trying to hold back tears. 5 years of marriage. Shared plans. Dreams of buying a home near Shevchenko Park. Dozens of small crises survived together. And now it was all collapsing because of one plastic stick. Instead of joy over the long-awaited news, she was being accused of the worst betrayal. I have never cheated on you, she whispered, looking at his broad back. Tara suddenly turned around, grabbed his jacket from the chair, and headed for the hallway. I need time. I need to be away from you, he said over his shoulder as he opened the front door. I'll come for my things tomorrow. The lock clicked. The apartment fell silent, broken only by the steady hum of the refrigerator. Left alone, Ina sat still for a long time, unable to move. Her thoughts tangled. How could this happen? When Taras had gone through the fertility tests after several failed attempts to conceive, the results had been devastating. The clinic had given him a clear diagnosis. The couple had spent a long time grieving, then accepted it and decided to live for themselves, focus on careers, and travel. And now nature had played its own cruel joke. Slowly, she rose, picked up the test again, and stared at the 2 lines. They were still there. Inside her, a new life was growing. A tiny human who knew nothing about this complicated world. Instead of sharing the joy with the person closest to her, she would have to fight total distrust. The sleepless night dragged on painfully long. Several times her hand reached for her phone, wanting to call him, but the screen remained dark. Pride and hurt were stronger than the desire to beg for understanding. If her partner could erase years of loyalty so easily, was it even worth explaining anything? Morning came to Chernivtsi wrapped in thick fog. The streets looked gray and unfriendly. Ina dressed mechanically, pulled on a warm beige trench coat, and left the building. The walk to the office usually took 20 minutes along the cobblestone streets past old Austrian buildings. That route always calmed her and inspired new ideas for advertising campaigns. Today, though, even the architecture failed to catch her attention. At the office, the usual bustle continued. Colleagues discussed projects, drank coffee, and laughed. Hi. You look terrible, said Alina, the art director and a close friend, settling into the chair beside her. Did you work until 2 again on those layouts for the furniture salon? No. I just slept badly, Ina replied, forcing a weak smile. Tell me the truth. What happened? Did you and Taras fight again about the renovation? She didn't want to open up at work, but keeping everything inside was worse. I'm pregnant, she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear. Alina froze with a paper cup halfway to her lips. Wow. That's wonderful. You wanted this for so long. Why do you look like something awful happened? Because Taras thinks it isn't his. The words came out with effort. Her throat tightened. She told Alina everything, every detail of the previous night's scene. Her friend listened silently, only occasionally shaking her head. What an idiot, Alina finally exhaled. Instead of going back to the doctor and retesting, he starts accusing you immediately. Male ego is an incredibly fragile and dangerous thing. What am I supposed to do now? Ina asked helplessly. Work. And make an appointment with a gynecologist. You need to think about your health and the baby. Let him sit in his little offense until he comes to his senses. The rest of the day passed in a fog. By 6 p.m, Ina closed her laptop and went to a private clinic on Ruska Street, where she had managed to get an appointment during lunch. The doctor, a kind woman about 50, carefully listened to her story, performed an examination, and confirmed the pregnancy. About 5 weeks, she said while filling in the digital chart. Development is normal. As for your question about your husband, male infertility is rarely absolute unless there is a complete absence of the necessary organs. There are cases of spontaneous improvement, stress-related changes, changes in diet, and even laboratory errors from years ago. But how do I prove the truth? Ina asked, her voice strained. You won't, not until the baby is born and a genetic test is done, the specialist replied sympathetically. Or you persuade your partner to undergo a new examination. Though in my experience, patients like this rarely admit they were wrong at this stage. The main thing now is that you must not stress. Walking out of the clinic, Ina felt a strange sense of relief. The pregnancy was real, confirmed, undeniable. This was no longer just 2 lines on plastic. It was a tiny heart that would soon begin beating inside her. If Taras chose blind jealousy over logic, that was his problem. But when she got home, she found a surprise. The light in the windows was on, and a pair of familiar winter boots stood in the hallway. Her heart sank. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe he understood how absurd he had been. But in the living room, Taras was sitting on the sofa in front of a switched-off television. Beside him stood a large travel bag, half filled with clothes. I came to take some of my things, he said dryly, without even looking up. The rest you can keep. Her hope shattered into pieces. I went to the doctor today, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her hands were trembling. She said the old tests could have been wrong, or something may have changed. You should just get checked again. Taras shot up, his face twisting with anger again. You think I'm an idiot? You expect me to go around doctors finding excuses for your promiscuity? I consulted my own urologist today. He confirmed the odds are 0. You got pregnant by another man and now you want to pin someone else's child on me. That's a lie, she cried. Why would I lie? Because I earn more. Because I pay most of the rent for this apartment. Because it's convenient to keep a reliable fool around, he barked. Then he straightened, staring at her with a cold, cutting look. I'll agree to a DNA test, but only after the birth. Until then, we're done. And one more thing. Since I paid the rent this month, I have every right to stay here. You've got 1 week to find another place and move out. The air disappeared from the room. Ina stood in the middle of her own living room, unable to believe her ears. The man with whom she had shared dreams, secrets, and a bed for 5 years had just thrown out his pregnant partner. You're serious? She whispered, tears running hot down her cheeks. You're kicking me out? I'm not kicking you out. I'm giving you a week. Enough time to find something simpler, he snapped while fastening his bag. I need space. I'm going to a hotel for a couple of days so we won't run into each other. When I come back next Tuesday, your things better be gone. The door slammed again, leaving behind suffocating emptiness. The next several days turned into hell. Finding an apartment in Chernivtsi was always difficult, and now, with prices rising sharply, finding decent housing on a single salary felt almost impossible. She spent hours scrolling through listings, calling agents, hearing refusals, or running into scams. Money frightened her most. Her savings were enough for the first and last month's rent of a modest one-room apartment somewhere on the outskirts. And there were still medical expenses, vitamins, and new clothes ahead. Work was falling apart too. The client kept changing the advertising budget and demanding impossible results for minimal pay. She felt constant nausea, whether from morning sickness or stress, she didn't know. One evening, while looking at yet another apartment listing online, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen and froze in fear. The pain didn't go away. It became more intense, pulling and unpleasant. With shaking fingers she called an ambulance. The dispatcher accepted the call quickly. The wait felt endless. She lay on the sofa, one hand on her abdomen, whispering words of comfort, not only to the baby but to herself. The ambulance arrived in 15 minutes. After a quick exam and several questions, the decision was immediate. Hospitalization. Threat of miscarriage in early pregnancy. Under the watchful eye of the paramedic, she packed her things and left the apartment that had seemed like a fortress only a few days earlier, but had now become a cold trap. The city hospital smelled of medicine and disinfectant. A quiet older woman slept in the bed next to hers. The next morning, after a series of tests and an ultrasound, the doctor delivered a serious but hopeful verdict. Severe stress had caused uterine hypertonus. She needed complete rest, no nerves, no physical strain. At least a week under observation. What about work? What about moving out? Work can wait. Take sick leave, the doctor said. As for moving, you'll need help from relatives or friends. You absolutely cannot lift heavy bags right now. Her parents lived in another city and had their own health problems, so worrying them was out of the question. Only Alina remained. Her friend listened carefully and, without drama, immediately took control of the situation. Here's what we'll do, she said. You lie still and do not move. I'll find you a place. My cousin's studio on Independence Avenue has just become available. We'll handle everything. My brother has a van, and I'll talk to your ex myself if he starts making a scene. In the darkest moment, a ray of light always appears. The next few days in the hospital were devoted to restoring her emotional balance. She read books, looked out the window, and tried to detach from thoughts of Taras. He still hadn't called. Not one message. Not one question about her condition. 5 years had dissolved into the air, leaving only bitterness. Alina visited regularly, bringing fruit and homemade food, sharing office gossip, and trying to distract her from the pain. By the way, I already have the keys to the new apartment, she said during one of her visits, pulling a set of metal keys from her bag. Your things were moved yesterday. Taras came by the old place looking for some documents. What did he say? Inna asked tensely. Nothing special. Her friend clearly wasn't telling the whole truth. Alina, tell me, Inna insisted. I need to know. Alina sighed heavily. He wasn't alone. He was with a blonde woman. He said she was a realtor helping evaluate the apartment. But honestly, she didn't look much like a realtor. More like a woman who already felt at home there. A sharp pain pierced Inna's chest. So that was the real reason. All the accusations of infidelity, his refusal to trust the doctors, the demand that she leave quickly, all of it had just been a convenient excuse to get rid of his pregnant partner and make room for his new mistress. Anger rose slowly inside her, pushing out pity. Now everything fell into place. Taras wasn't an insulted man whose ego had been wounded. He was a cynical manipulator who had used the situation for his own benefit. He had turned everything around so that he looked like the victim, leaving the person closest to him drowning in guilt. I'm not going to let him get away with this, she said quietly, but firmly. Easy, Alina warned, putting a hand on her shoulder. You can't go to war right now. Your main battle is to carry the baby safely. Karma will catch up with him anyway. Karma is too slow. I want the biological father to acknowledge the child and pay child support. If he's so principled about the DNA test, we'll do it properly. And when the result shows 99% paternity, I'll take every coin from him for the baby's upkeep. Her discharge from the hospital was uneventful. The doctor gave detailed instructions, prescribed supportive medication, and wished her a calm pregnancy. The new apartment was small, but bright and clean. Her things stood neatly in the corner. A new life was beginning. At work, she was welcomed warmly. Management, after hearing the situation, agreed to let her work partly remotely. Financial stability slowly returned. A month passed. Her belly began to round slightly. The nausea faded, replaced by a strange craving for pickles with chocolate, a classic pregnancy oddity that she and Alina used to joke about during lunch breaks. One evening, while returning from the grocery store, Ina noticed a familiar car near her building. The black crossover they had once bought together, but registered in Tara's name. Her pulse quickened. What did he want? Why had he come? Tara's got out of the car, looking tired. Dark circles lay under his eyes. He came closer and blocked her path to the entrance. We need to talk, he said quietly, without the old aggression. We have nothing to talk about, she said, tightening her grip on the bag of groceries and trying to step around him. Please. I made a huge mistake, he said. She stopped, surprised. This was something new. He had never admitted fault before, especially not so openly. Which one of your dozen mistakes are you talking about? She asked dryly. Accusing me of cheating? Throwing me out? Or the blonde you dragged into our apartment the very next day after I moved out? He flinched as if struck. You know about Kristina? Chernivtsi was a small city. It was hard to hide anything from prying eyes. It was a mistake, he said quickly. She just took advantage of the situation. I was broken, drunk, angry. She happened to be there. But it meant nothing. I kicked her out a few days ago. Ina laughed bitterly, without a trace of sympathy. So you came to apologize only because things didn't work out with your new girl? What a touching story. No, it's not about her, he said. I went to another doctor in Kiev. Retested everything. The pause stretched. You were right, he said at last. The previous diagnosis was wrong, or something changed. The professor said I can absolutely have children. His gaze dropped to her barely visible belly. It's my child. No, she replied coldly. It's my child. Only mine. You gave up on this baby the moment you threw the pregnancy test in my face. Ina, I was scared. I didn't believe it was possible. Forgive me. Let's start over. Come home, he begged, reaching out to touch her shoulder. She pulled away sharply. You threw a pregnant woman out of the house while she was at risk of miscarriage. I lay under 4 drips not knowing whether the baby would survive, while you entertained yourself with another woman in the bed we bought together. That is not something you forgive. I'll pay. I'll help. I'll do whatever you want, he said desperately. You'll do the DNA test you wanted after the birth, officially. And until then, you'll stay out of my life. She walked past him, opened the building door, and disappeared into the dim corridor. Her legs were shaking, but inside she felt a strange clarity. It was a small victory, but an important one. A victory over fear and painful dependence on the past. Winter arrived quietly in Chernivtsi. The city was covered in a thin layer of snow. Kobylianska Street glittered with festive lights. People were preparing for the holidays despite the tension and everyday difficulties. The future mother walked forward with confidence. The second trimester brought long-awaited relief. The nausea disappeared, and much more energy returned. Work was going well. She had managed to close several large contracts, which promised solid bonuses before maternity leave. Her relationship with Teras had shifted into cold neutrality. After that conversation near the entrance, he no longer tried to impose himself, though he regularly transferred money to her bank card. The amounts were substantial, more than enough for rent and proper medical care. At first, she felt tempted to send the money back and prove her independence, but common sense won. The finances belonged to the child. Pride should never stand in the way of the baby's comfort. Alina remained her main support. Together they chose the first baby things, discussed possible names, and planned how to arrange the small studio for the newborn. By the way, the art director asked one evening over tea, "Have you thought about changing companies after maternity leave? Our competitors are looking for a head of marketing. Better salary, much more flexible schedule. You haven't even been born yet, and you're already job hunting for me." Ina laughed, gently stroking her round belly. "Let's first deal with the main life project. The second planned screening is coming soon, they'll tell us the baby's sex." The day of the ultrasound was sunny and frosty. The private clinic room was filled with soft light. "Well, let's take a look," the doctor said, carefully moving the sensor across her skin. "Heartbeat is normal, development matches the term. All organs are formed correctly. Would you like to know the sex?" "Yes, of course." The specialist squinted at the colored monitor, then,